Thank you. Today, the second part on Hegel's science of logic. Yesterday we had the first part. Today, part two. At first, the doctrine of essence. The logic of essence, the most difficult part of the deduction in the science of logic. The most difficult contains the treatise on the essential unity of immediacy and mediation in still incomplete, imperfect formations up to the bridge to the actual concept, via first, reflection in itself, second, appearance, and third, actuality. In the science of logic, Hegel escapes the dilemma of immediacy and mediation in a logical way. Quote from Hegel: the entire second part of the logic, the part on being, the part on essence, there is a mistake in the text. The part on essence is a treatise on the essentially self-determining unity of immediacy and mediation. End of the quote. Immediacy and mediation must be an essential unity in indivisibility. There is nothing between heaven and earth which does not fulfill this symbiosis. And secondly, this identity is to be understood as an entity which posits itself. All logical stages are forms of this unity. The logic of essence is the result of the logic of being. Essence as the reality, the actualization of being. The logic of essence must bring these opposites into relations, the opposites in the realm of being, into relation. It's the main word, relation. Essence also achieves a hitherto unfulfilled connection of immediacy and mediation. Essence being the indispensable power of differentiation, not quite the quintessence, conceptual thinking. The categories of metaphysics and science are the products of reflective understanding, you remember. Such an understanding first determines differentiation as independent, legitimizing itself by differentiating the concrete in abstract determination and making them relative, but they are only standing next to each other, resulting in an indissoluble dualism. Only an identity of understanding, no speculative unity of the concept can emerge out of this. This is not genuine self-determination, since the object is not freely determined by itself. Traditional metaphysics, which get formed in the logic of essence, determines things through thinking. In this sense, Hegel's science of logic is a system of metaphysics. But pre-Kantian modern metaphysics got these abstract determination from representation, not from comprehensive thinking. Representation, imagination, and understanding grasp these determination as something given, immediate, assumed facts like world and God. Given. This is the myth of the given is in all things dogmatism. Sorry for St. Augustine. Such things lead firstly to excellent as Hegel sarcastically remarks, predicates like existence, that God is, not what he is. Secondly, this creates an arbitrary collection of infinite set of predications of God. But it's an arbitrary collection, it's not a deduction. An absolute substance with multiple and maybe infinitely many attributes. Thirdly, in antinomic cases, the theorem of the excluded contradiction is called upon. The either-or. Inescapably, this procedure gets caught in the fearful tentacle of the skeptical tropes of Sextus Empiricus. Here the trope of infinite progress and relativity. Skepticism, Pyrrhonism, fights the one-sidedness of such a metaphysics, battles dogmatism with its exclusion of opposed theses of equal value, the isolating understanding. It is not by coincidence that in the logic of essence, this reference is explicitly established with the terms phenomenon in skepticism and appearance in transcendental idealism. You remember yesterday, appearance in transcendental idealism, Erscheinung, the idea of mediation. The two-ness, the duality comes radically into play. Both phenomenon and appearance do not represent a thing. Only appearance, this is Kant and the old skeptics. An indifferent, immediate being. They exist only in their determination and relation to the subject. Abstractly said, to an I, to a self. Thus, the necessary inversion of being into appearing takes place. The way from the extreme myth of the given to the other extreme of the myth of the construction. A quandary has arisen. The departure from being implies the arrival at it, the return of being into itself, to the inherent logical basic pattern. In essence, the truth of being is timeless past. The pure being in its constitution as negation of everything particular, as the unmoved moved, you know this from Aristotle, logically presupposes a movement which accomplishes the purification, the total abstraction, the abstinence from everything determined. The dynamics within the sphere of being, which has its basic type in becoming, can be considered as an underdetermined, an underdefined form of reflection. The become being as past being does not arise from an alien negativity, but from its own infinite movement of being as a unity of the twofold negation. First, it is considered as indifferent against all determinations of being, being in itself, any being other, the relation to the other is sublated completely, an absolute essence to which no determination can be attached. The being, second, the being for itself, insofar it is itself this negativity, the sublation of otherness. Thus, the moving does not take place as a transition, an unmediated change into another. What is independent can only be thought within the unity, is not immediate, but posited now in the logic of essence, mediated by the essence itself, insofar as they exist only in this relation, only in the relation. They cannot yet be considered completely free. Because of the relation. On the one hand, a progress beyond the first isolated determinations can be stated. They are now in relation, but they remain in this isolated validity because the categories of essence are still contaminated with their external being. The predicates or attributes cannot be deduced conclusively. Hegel calls this negativity reflection, a perpetual pendulum motion like the reflection of a mirror, with the determination and its opposite being equally valid. An example of such dynamic antinomy is the romantic ironic principle of the perpetual oscillation between self-constitution and self-destruction. Perpetual self-constitution and self-negation, self-destruction. Again and so on, with no result. This is the romantic, ironic, the principle of irony, not the principle of Hegel. The doctrine of essence discusses the concept in its essential differentiation, its relationality, relation, as a mediation, as a positive negation of the negative. It stands between being and concept. The concept, it's the middle. The concept shows itself implicitly as an unfolding system of reflected determinations, culminating in contradiction. The categories of reflective metaphysics may be, for instance, appearance, cause, ground, substance, God. These are the categories of this reflective metaphysics. Are critical landmarks. For this, Hegel speaks of philosophy of reflection or philosophy of understanding, Verstand, not Vernunft. Recognizing this conflict of determinations represent the great negative step to the true concept of reason. Only the great negative step. In the final of the logic of essence, relativity is relativized, contradiction is sublated, irony is ironized, and the pendulum of reflection is sublated. In the oxymoron of an absolute relation. This is an opposition, huh? Absolute and relation. It's a contradiction if you speak about the absolute relation. And then finally in the concept. First, the horror of contradiction. The law of identity and the law of contradiction, a crucial point for understanding essence, lies in the overcoming of one of the basic prejudices of the old logic. The old logic. One of this main point in the old logic is the law of contradiction. The thesis that contradiction is not thinkable. But as Hegel says, contradiction is the indication of truth, and non-contradiction is the indication of error. All true philosophy infinitely sublates the law of contradiction. This is Hegel, quote. In the phenomenology, skepticism is the decisive figure of reversal, In the science of logic, contradiction is the logical consequence of negativity, the turning point of the concept. In reason, contradiction is the principle of internal self-generation, self-centered negativity as, quote Hegel, the inherent pulse of the self-movement. End of the quote. Contradiction is the dynamic, not a lack of detriment. The concept is self-contradictory, yet the sublated contradiction, determinate negativity, you remember from the principle from the phenomenology of spirit and from the first part on science of logic, determinate negativity, with its paradigmatic determination of contradiction, is the engine of logical thought that fully sublates logical determination. This logical dynamic comes to the contradiction through the being nothing oxymoron. It was the first oxymoron, being nothing, the antinomy, which is its own category of contradiction, while being nothing is the minimal contraposition. Essence is both the contradiction of equal and opposite statements and the sublation of contradiction as such. As at the beginning of the sphere of being, the doctrine of essence starts with the twin formula of a double beginning. Immediately as beginning and mediated in the sense of coming from being, the result of its unfolding. Then the proof comes to the initial equality with itself can only be thought by the sublation of this equality, the legitimation of becoming, in the sphere of being, as infinite movement, as reflection. Being is the incessant movement between identity and non-identity itself, the negativity referring only to itself, constant suspension of immediacy as well as mediation, presupposing and positing, finding and constructing, oscillate constantly. They are in an alternating motion, in dynamic relation to each other, are in the state of relativity and negativity up to their sublation in the real unity of the two moments of the relation, in the positive sensible, the unity of identity and non-identity. In its now achieved determination as sublated, the remainder of being is preserved in the terminus of appearance. Again, the phenomenon of skepticism and the appearance in transcendental idealism in Kant, in the paradox, in the oxymoron of reflected immediacy. Skepticism, Hegel quote, does not allow itself to state being, that something is. The phenomenon, or what the skeptic calls appearance, is supposed to have no basis in being. There is no indifferent being, no thing in itself, no something without relation to a subject. This is the old skeptic. However, the appearance spoken of by the skeptic has, Hegel, quote, the whole manifold richness of the world as its content. The appearance spoken by the subjective idealist like Kant likewise comprehends, Hegel quote, the whole extent of these manifold determination in itself, but not deduced. This content remains immediate, given. Therefore, there is an aporia between subjective mediation and immediate given object, also in Kant. You have in Kant some parts of realism and some parts of idealism. And it's not, there is no unity possible, the negative and the positive. The realm of essence is the realm of reflection, the unity of the given and the constructed. Hegel, the reflection therefore finds an immediate, finds the pronunciation on finds immediate, beyond which it goes and from which it is the return. But this return is only the presupposition of what is found. End of the quote. Only finding is one side of this transcendental theory. The latter is not purely immediate. It, Hegel, becomes only in that it has departed. Immediacy and mediation are not independent, but sublated moments of the concept. This is Hegel. The principle of philosophical realism and constructivist subjective idealism are not isolated, but only two sides of monistic idealism, of Hegel's idealism. In their convergence, the doctrine of essence culminates and paves the way to the concept. The form of difference and non-identity becomes now the form of contradiction, so that the object is reflected in itself an identity of identity and non-identity. Identity determines the identical and is non-identity to itself. In the core thesis of the old logic, according to which identity and non-identity are principially different, it is said in Hegel that identity is a different thing, namely different from difference. Identity has by its nature the difference in itself. The old law, pronunciation, old law of identity was one-sided, abstract and inadequate. A identical with A is just a tautology. Likewise, the negative form of this law of identity, the principle of contradiction, A cannot be both A and not A, was unjustified. Neither of them are propositions of reason. Through the identical way of speaking, negativity is pronounced at the same time. That's why the highest form of difference is contradiction, or in Kant's words, antinomy, an antipodian relationship, articulating both positivity and negativity in one. The contraposition is characterized by the poles' mutual exclusion, independently reflecting with equal validity, like the antinomy of immediacy and mediation, indifference and difference, infinity and finitude. Neither one law nor the two opposite laws of equal validity can express reason. The antinomy, according to Hegel in his first book, has to be exposed as the self-sublating contradiction. Both positive and negative get sublated through their independence. Every moment has the determination of the other, inclusion and exclusion, or in Hegel's word, translating itself into its opposite, and vice versa. The result is a restless disappearance of the respective opposite, the movement from nothing to nothing. Thus, no actual knowledge can be generated. The restraint of judgment is necessary. This is the suspension of judgment. This is a main idea of the old skepticism. Suspension of judgment. The oneness is now opposed by the two-ness. This monistic principle with the dualistic principle. It's antipode. The one as being together and the two dia as the being apart. It's the word two or dia this is the ground for the speaking of dialectic. Dia, there is the meaning of two. The monistic one against the dualistic dialectic two. If the skeptical mode of relativity is part of the relation, so is the principle of the relativity of all knowledge. Hegel turns the tables here. Negativity is one-sided and self-destructive as it fulfills itself. You remember this was a goal of the phenomenology of spirit. The speculative cannot be grasped in the mere opposition of proposition and counter-proposition. The antinomy has the logical defect of merely exclusive and unconnected propositions. The negative and the positive are moments of a higher unity, which Hegel category calls essence as the ground. The reflection of essence will be brought to a higher stage and to contradiction. Therefore, Hegel hits two birds with one stone. Contradiction leads logically to a category. It is also proves paradigmatically to be a determined negation, the system's motor. The unity of opposites. Some illustrative example can be helpful to understand this idea, this Hegel's position, although they cannot replace argumentation, only examples. But it's a good pedagogical way to give some examples. They demonstrate contradiction and its unity. Hegel uses, for example, the magnetic polarity. You know all this. The mutual condition and exclusion of the two poles, which has its ground in magnetism. You have two sides. The same is true for the poles of electricity, where in each case what is different is confronted with its other. Without this opposition, electricity is unthinkable. Its ground is the poles in tension with each other, positive and negative pole. It's indispensable sides, and the unity has the name here electricity. That's the unity of negative and positive. It's only one example. Traditional logic views contradiction as impossible to overcome and makes them appears. Traditional logic, not Hegel. A better example is credit or debt. By taking on debts, not only negative side arise, but also a value that is in the same time not having, being a debtor, and having, being a creditor. Debit and credit thus form a unity in opposition. I think this is clear. One need not fear the contradiction. But traditional logic excludes the contradiction due to an admissible procedure of proof and takes the latter to be an unsolvable dilemma. The core of reflection is relation, relativity. Essence is, to use a chess analogy, a constant movement of castling. You can play chess?
Not that good.
Yeah?
I'm not good at playing chess.
But the world champion is from China in chess. Ding Liren. Ding Liren. It's the world champion of chess. It's from China.
Okay, it's very English.
But you know chess.
Yeah.
And there is castling. You know this castling in chess? Movement is the existing, Hegel, contradiction itself in this castling. Reversal, leading to the concept of self-developing self-determination. The concept determines all antipodes. Without this cognition, Hegel, there can be no progress in philosophy. It's a hard formulation. No progress in philosophy. Traditional metaphysics, as the doctrine of essence shows, turn out to be the dogmatism of the given, an indispensable dimension of logic, as the self-determination of thinking consists in the further determination of the self, the thought of subjectivity, of the free. The one concept is the free, so Hegel. Entirely in the Hegelian sense, freedom here means a being wholly at one with itself. Self-determination, especially with regard to the elementary determination of the concept. And this elementary determination, you remember yesterday, universality, particularity, and singularity, and the unity of these three. What is offered are a characteristic of the free. The thinking of thinking, and Aristotle, you remember, is as much about the thing in itself as it is about pure thought. Hegel attempts to overcome the conception of the given and the constructive. Hegel, the matter of logic is the logic of the matter, and vice versa. Absolute idealism does not recognize the finite as true being, neither immediate nor mediated. The ideality of finitude is an absolute principle of philosophy for Hegel. The immediate or external object has no true reality. It only appears to be independent. Also, such a principle in the old Greek philosophy, like Thales, his principle was water. Not a real water in the river or in the sea. That was an ideal principle. That's why for Hegel, all real, authentic philosophy is idealism. There is no other philosophy for Hegel. Skepticism and transcendental idealism attack the myth of the given. Also Kant. Dogmatic realism and the dogmatism of innate ideas, like Leibniz and others, and make the acid test for philosophical knowledge. It's also an idea of Kant. Its conception of Prüfstein in Kant. Its conception of appearing essence enables the development of skepticism and transcendental philosophy, constituting a new understanding of existence and actuality. Both skepticism and transcendental idealism throw the baby out with the bathwater. The appearance is no basis for being. For example, a thing in itself is an empty name. An exaggerated tenderness toward things that should not contradict each other is represented. The finite is considered as something that does not contradict itself. Kant, not Hegel. It is a fundamental critique from Hegel to Kant. Things that should not contradict. Appearance has a whole different world for its content. The translation from being to appearance brings first the gain of the annihilation of the legend of the absolutely immediately existing. The thought of the mediated, reflected immediacy. However, likewise, second, the non-overcoming of the paradigm of the given. Insofar as this content is not simply posited by itself and a new absolute immediacy is created, and thus the unity of immediacy and mediation is not sufficiently gained. Philosophy, so Hegel argues, cannot give up this principle anymore, especially in the face of the variance of realism and materialism, which are still virulent today. Hereby it becomes clear what a rocky path Hegel tries to walk, and how the dualisms could be transcended. The dualism of dogmatism and skepticism in a third philosophy, which is neither dogmatism nor skepticism, and thus both at the same time. The dualism of being realism and subjective realism, subjective idealism of the myth of the given and the myth of the construction is the speculative apprehending thinking of absolute idealism. Essence as self-mover comes from itself and stays with itself. Its dynamic goes through stages of this reflective movement. The main contradiction, for example, are being in itself versus appearance, parts versus whole, internal versus external, the absolute of the logic of essence versus its manifestation, possibility versus actuality, substance versus attribute, and so on. These are the logic of this relation. It's a relation between substance and attributes. The absolute of the logic of essence is the unity of the positive and the negative. External reflection results in a formal contradiction. If all thinking is relative, again, the mirror law is also true. All thinking is absolute. The result is a contradiction. An absolute, if it is not to differentiate itself or exclude relativity is also relative. Absolute and relative keep switching back and forth and are not quite unified. The transition from the doctrine of essence to the doctrine of concepts is one of the great challenges in the logic, in Hegel's science of logic. In the third section, the doctrine of essence, the doctrine of a concept, actualization, the absolute of the doctrine of essence and its self-distinction take shape. Being's own becoming and the reflection of essence go back to their foundation. Only here is the hitherto unfolded whole of the logical movement of the spheres of being and essence exposed. Every generated categorical determination Every part is itself the whole. All determinations are posited in the absolute of essence are sublated. However, such a substance remains an unmoved identity. It lacks the principle of individuation, of subjectivity. In this monistic idealism of substance, maybe in Spinoza, the determinations of substance cannot be logically derived from it. They, the attributes and modes, are only lined up one after the other, merely taken up as given. Thus, this conception lacks inner coherence. The substance is not yet subjectivity. The last unity of essence and being is absolute substance, not the passive, resting substantiality, but the absolute relation to itself, the substance which manifests in actuality, equal to itself, that determines itself. Because of this identical self-positing in its accidents, in each of its moments, the category of being and the determination of reflection coexist. Hegel articulates this coexistence, this unity, with the paradox, I spoke about this, the paradox of absolute relation or of absolute relativity. The basic character of this absolute substantiality lies in the consummation of the aforementioned movement. It is actuosity, activity as self-positing, which implies a bending back or returning to the beginning, a higher determined catching up of the beginning in the free act of thinking for itself. Thinking generates the other of itself, can be at one with itself in it, and is thus free. The germ for the thinking of the absolute substance as subjectivity is exposed. The absolute relation is now posited, and this subjectively posited unity of its determination, which are posited as wholes themselves and thus just as much as determinations, is the concept. My last part, a smaller part, is on the concept, the third chapter of the science of logic. In the figure of the one concept as the free lies a core characteristic of the distinctively Hegelian understanding of the concept, freedom, the one from which it is forged. The concept determines itself, it constitutes itself. Self-determination of the concept implies that it gives itself its determinations and laws, does not simply already have them, does not simply find them in itself. In the consummation of the thinking, of its pure self-relation, it remains with itself in the other of itself, free, in the sense of a complete, closed, seamless self-relation. Now it's the closed, complete self-relation, without difference in content. Hegel understands the progression from necessity to freedom, from reality of substantiality to the concept, as the hardest one of all. The hardest one of all, this progression, this bridge. Only the concept is the free, the real freedom. Freedom, of course, is meant here in a Hegelian sense as the unification of thinking with its other as with itself. This is Hegel's concept of freedom. Insofar as the independence, the self, proved to be an infinite negative relation to itself, as the negative par excellence, this alternating movement remaining with itself in its highest stage as reciprocity of determination, a constant oscillation, marks the transition to the concept. The latter can thus be regarded as the resolved contradiction, which contains and carries the determination of the contradiction. Objective logic, the first two parts of the science of logic, is the genesis of the concept. Its last stage, the dialectical dynamics of absolute substance, whose relation is one of necessity, the relation of the concept. On the other hand, is one of freedom. Absolute substance changes to the intrinsic negativity of self-sublating freedom, in freedom as the nature of the concept. The antinomy of necessity and freedom is logically transgressive here. The old infernal fear of the negative loses its terror. Freedom, the free side of philosophy, can thus be seen as the highest form of the nothing, and the self-referential negativity is at the same time affirmation. The advocatus diaboli is domesticated, included as a stage of thinking, not a seesaw system. An eternal oscillation characterizes the second stage, but the immanent crossing over antinomic, the dialectical as principle of all movement and inner necessity. Philosophy thus contains the skeptical, the dialectical as one moment in itself. This objective logic proceeds into the subjective logic, into the concept. The identity emerging in essence as a reflective universality becomes a conceptual universality. The difference as a reflective particularity becomes a conceptual particularity. And the unity of the one reason, which perpetuates an absolute substance as a reflective particularity, becomes a conceptual universality. The three reflective determinations pass over into the concept, whose content consists in the trinity, in the logical fundamental code, universality, particularity, singularity. From this, it becomes clear that universality, particularity, and singularity cannot be a matter of number, nor of enumeration, juxtaposition, or succession. This results in a limit for formalizing, especially for the attempt to represent logical relations in the form of a logical calculus. This is one of the principles of today's analytic philosophy. The conceptual definitions, universality, particularity, singularity, are different. They are furthermore opposed to each other. Their relations are of a completely different essential nature than letters, lines, or mathematical science. Hegel, if concepts have now been taken in such way, and it's also today in the analytical philosophy, that they correspond to such science, then they cease to be concept, since man has language at his disposal as the means of signification peculiar to reason. It is pointless, according to Hegel, to look around for an imperfect mode of representation, imperfect mode, and to want to torment oneself with it. All logical progress is the representation of the one concept in Hegel. The science of logic is that's why a new philosophical science. His thinking is circular, but in a justifiable way, and returns home. It follows the path of the concept to the idea. There is also a change in the way in which determination of thought progress, while being passes over and essence shines, the concept develops itself, for all determinate things represent the free being of the entire concept. The staircase of thought as a dynamic sequence of stages of the concept leads first from subjectivity, the beginning, formal concept as mere posited and its cause. Second, objectivity, the real concept destined to immediacy having come into existence. And third, the unity of subjectivity and objectivity, the adequate concept, characterized by Hegel as the idea, the only content of Hegel's philosophy as we know. Hegel has, in Hegel, we have only one content of philosophy, the idea. Here it gains its freedom insofar as it gains objectivity in its subjectivity, and vice versa, so that it can be completely at one with itself, in the other of itself. Hegel hints at the character of self-determination by means of different expressions of this free determination. The concept as the forming and creating and so on. Here logic receives a very own and highest task for philosophy. The unfolding basic patterns of logic with the fundamental building blocks, this elementary logical inscription forms the keynote, the triad of the entire logical composition. However, at the stage now reached, each moment represents not only one of the determination, but the whole concept. This is very important. One is the whole. Here we find the exposition of a systematic connection, a logical step-by-step of the determination of the concept, of the types of judgment and of syllogism, not a mere disordered collection of these logical forms. According to Hegel, was the wrong page. The long chapter, I cut some points. The long chapter on subjectivity contains Hegel's doctrine of concepts, logical judgment, and syllogism, proving the concept and scientific claims. This is very important. The system of the forms of judgment and syllogism. The logic of judgment becomes the logic of syllogism because judgment is in a principle limited. The unity of conceptual determination in the form of overcoming division is the logical unification brought about the then follows the chapter on syllogism. I come to the end. In today, the logical idea as absolute unity of subjectivity and objectivity. Here, idea means something different. It does either in ordinary speech or in Plato or Kant. It is not just something that occurs to someone, not an otherworldly multiplicity of ideas or a principle of approximation. Kant's merits lies in his insistence on the idea of reason, directed against the reference to an experience that contradicts the idea. At the same time, however, Kant denies ideas the value of truth, because they cannot be given a congruent object in the world of the senses. For Hegel, the idea comprises the concept itself and its actualization. It is about the realization of the concept within the logical sphere, because the concept has its logical reality in its determination of particularity. Something can be recognized as actual only insofar it contains the idea in itself and it expresses it. What does not correspond to the concept has no truth. A work of art, example, is considered true or actual only if it fulfills the concept of art, like Antigone, Leonardo da Vinci's masterpieces. Not every artifact counts as a work of art, nor does every community count as a state. Hegel later puts this in the unjustly maligned formula in his philosophy of right. That which is actual is rational. His successful coup to deceive the censors, who misunderstand actual and existing as synonyms. Insofar as the concept of as idea achieved its freedom, the idea must carry the hardest opposition within itself and endure it. The process of idea based on the negativity immanent in the concept includes the stage of life of the idea, of cognition and will, of theoretical and practical idea. In the idea, the whole development of the logical sphere itself becomes its content and form. The true is thus the whole. Summing up, Hegel emphasizes once again that the essential moment of the concept lies in the thinking of the contradiction, that the thought of negativity forms the turning point of the movement of the concept. The idea, the absolute unity of logical subjectivity and logical object is established. The unity of the concept with itself. With the thinking, logical idea, we obtain logic as a new metaphysic, the foundation of Hegel's monistic idealism as the science of reason and freedom. In the result of the idea, we have mediation as much as immediacy. The form of immediacy, which stood seemingly at the beginning, can now be considered as proven, as mediated. Thus the circle closed by the return to the beginning. Thank you for your patience.